Hello and welcome to Dixon Cox with me, Nick Dixon, and Paul Cox, star of GB News and the epic comedy owner, as you can see on his
Oh
T-shirt
yeah,
there.
I didn't. I thought
Oh
meant to
yeah, didn't
change.
know I was promoting my brand there. Sorry,
Oh,
sorry about that.
sorry. What?
What epic comedy? You can catch all Paul's gigs at Epic Comedy, where he runs comedy gigs across the country. And by the way, if you want to watch the full episode of this and all my other episodes, go to nickdixon.net while we're doing plugs. Just had a great episode with Ben Habib. Obviously, mixed opinions on it, but lots of interesting comments. Full episode at nickdixon.net with all my other full episodes. A whole extra podcast me and Paul do on non-political topics as well as a full version of this podcast, Dixon Cox. Paul, you lot are about to say something.
I was just thinking maybe we have some innovative ideas, don't we? The Dixon Cox Go Mental thing is great. I was thinking maybe we could do some sort of Ouija board episode where we talk to dictators of the past. Maybe maybe we check in with sort of Mao and Hitler, and maybe they're all right.
Great idea. Ouija board. I mean, I'm saying it's a great idea. It's obviously a terrible idea, but Ouija board dictators of the past is your idea. And what one of us pretends to be Hitler and the other one just chatting to. Is that the idea, Paul?
Yeah, just get Rory, the producer, to sit in the background and feign an accent, and Rory would be up for that.
Yeah, I think so. Can you play Hitler this week, Rory? Well,
we want him kind of endearing.
See, normally I say the outrageous things, but today it's Paul. Sometimes it's you, actually. We did a lot of talk about Moose in the previous podcast.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure how comfortable you were with that, Nick, because it became Moose. I mean, the episode I didn't think was too Moose heavy, but the comments
were Moose heavy. Yeah, it's a funny one for me, Paul, because I realize I'm doing serious interviews with people like Douglas Carswell and Ben Habib. Then I'm talking about intercourse with Moose, and I said Moose is deliberately because it's funnier, but I know it's Moose. Plural, and I just think sometimes what a strange range of.
I think
things.
I'm the common denominator, there, mate. I bring out the child in you, and then I'm naturally just childish. So that's what that's about. And mate, you went with it last week, and it became quite the Moosey episode.
It seems a long time. Was that last week? It seems a long time ago. So much has happened. So we have to comment on the local elections, even though we're a bit late because we're a weekly podcast. That's the nature of it. And we're going to comment on Lucy Powell, that shocking story about the rape gangs and her bizarre comments.
Not Moosey Powell.
Huh?
Not Moosey Powell.
Not Moosey Powell, indeed. That's in the paywall section where it's exclusively about moose. That's a whole separate podcast. Nick and Paul discuss wildlife.
I promise.
No moose stuff. So we got local elections, Lucy Powell. We've got India. India have started a war with Pakistan. It seems significant. It's not really the kind of thing we talk about because we kind of do culture war. And there's also the India trade deal. Me and Paul will get our financial expertise on that if we get onto that. And there's an interesting little bonus story we might do about a Labour councillor getting ousted because she wanted taxis to be more safe, which is as mental as it sounds. Maybe we'll get onto that in the paywall bit. But we've got to start with the local elections then. I mean, where to start? There's also a slight update on that, which is Starmer, how he's faring today as we record in PMQs, which is he's getting hammered on the winter fuel payment still and net zero, because Tony Blair has said net zero is an electoral disaster, by the way, and Blunkett has now chipped in and said pretty much the same. And Starmer's going, no, stop it, Tony.
There isn't really a left-wing progressive cornerstone policy that is no longer under attack, is there?
Good point.
DEI, that's huge, under attack. Environmentalism, by which I mean net zero zealotry, under attack. Multiculturalism, under attack. And not just from the centre ground and the right, but from the left and Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nick.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, it's where to start on these local elections. Obviously, massive success for reform and Labour got hammered. But on that point about policies, there's a really interesting thing in the Times where you can look at this little graph, which came from More in Common, the pollsters. And it was to do with groups that had switched from Labour to Reform and which policies had damaged Labour. So if you look, they actually have some positive policies like launching GB Energy, weirdly, even though it's sort of it's rubbish. But and actually illegal migrant deportations, even though they haven't actually done it, is seen as positive. Employment rights, renters' rights, sewage bill, Ukraine negotiations, and of course minimum wage increase. 78% aware, 65% think it reflects positively on them. So you get to see the awareness and the positivity. And then British Steel takeover is not bad, but the really negative ones, So the absolute most negative one is winter fuel allowance, which has 87% aware, minus 62% think it reflects positively on Labour. So it's absolute disastrous policy from the start. Still being talked about today in PMQs as we record. Obviously should drop it. Let's see if they do. Prisoner releases, 84% aware, 48% thinks it reflects minus 48%. So terrible again. The one that was really interesting to me was the handling of the riots. I'm just trying to look for it. There's these tiny dots on a graph, and you've got to try and find it. So the riots handling, 66% aware, minus 10% thinks it reflects positively on Labour. Now, this is interesting because everyone said, oh, he handles Southport well, all these mainstream media people. Well, he handles Southport well. If you got little comments from people in politics, behind the scenes sources, and there was always, oh, he handled that well. And I was like, he didn't handle that well. He handled that absolutely terribly. He called normal people far right because they didn't want children murdered. So he handled it terribly. And I always knew that would come back to bite him. And the fact that 66% aware and minus 10% thinks it reflects positively shows that's true. If you combine it with the flip side, which is the prisoner releases, because he had to make space by putting Facebook grannies in, he had to release violent criminals. There was a man who stabbed someone to death the day he was released. So that's the flip side. So those two are incredibly unpopular. So that's just interesting to note in light of these elections. Reeves' CV, 65% aware, minus 60% thinks it reflects positively on Labour. So that's a big liability for them. So it's interesting what cuts through with the public. But something cut through, Paul, because they got absolutely hammered by reform, as did the Tories. People are calling it a disaster for Labour, an extinction level event for the Tories. Is there anything we can say on it that hasn't been said? What was your take?
No, I don't think there is anything that we can say that hasn't been said. I mean, Sir John Curtis.
Come up with something more.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. And we'll see you next week. Let's read a couple of comments out and go. No, of course, there are things, nobody said it the way I'm just about to say it because I don't know all the words. So I'm just going to...
There'll be more moose references.
Yeah, nobody said it with a moose reference. So
that's true.
Stay tuned. Look, and I always look to people like Sir John Curtis on this, who has proven himself to be fairly neutral throughout all of his... I mean, this is the election pollster guy. He's the guy who genuinely seems unaffiliated. He'll challenge, but he'll challenge Conservative MPs, or challenge Reform MPs, or challenge Labour MPs. Famously with
Bridget Phillipson.
Bridget Phillipson, yeah.
And that clip you're talking about.
That was fantastic. I don't want to go too much into that because I'll get myself sidetracked, because that was really good. But he has said that the map shows that Reform's success is not a protest vote. And I think that was where a lot of people went to. That okay, so the build-up was Reform are going to do well. So people, perhaps on our side of the argument, were like, we hope so, let's wait and see. And people on the other side of the argument were like, really hope not. But if they do, we'll just blame it on something. We'll make it as reductive as we can and say, oh, it's just a protest vote. John Curtis doesn't think so, and neither do I. It's not a protest vote. It's the only vote, because who else are you going to vote for? You are going to get the same, no matter what, if you vote for Conservative, Labour, Greens, Lib Dems, Independent, by which we now know to mean Muslim independence. Essentially, that's what the independent vote means now. They're interested in stuff that's happening 3,000 miles away. Less so. Okay, Israel, Gaza, understand it to the best of my professional ability, but it doesn't affect day-to-day, and it certainly doesn't affect local elections. I don't think it should affect national politics either. Really don't. But anyway, for another time. So the only vote really is Reform, if you want any form of change. And of course, the amusing thing was the people that wholeheartedly support the people that never changed anything are now saying that Reform will never change anything. We can't try. I mean, it's a bit like when we talk about the positives and negatives for Labour. Anything in that positive section is essentially people believing Labour's own hype. So they said, didn't we manage Southport well? And then somebody who supports the left went, didn't they manage Southport well? And that's become a thing now, and they're aware of it, and it's a positivity. No, absolutely not. Think of the evidence that's available to us now. Mothers in prison for 2 years for sending distasteful tweets. Okay? Not a success. Labelling any white person who decided that the murder of those poor young girls meant that we were far right, that anybody who challenges the rape gangs was racist. And their only argument against it was, well, white people rape children too. Brilliant. Yeah, that's not the argument, mate. It's nowhere near the argument. What we're saying is the white men that get accused and convicted of raping children get justice 9 times out of 10.
Let's go
The
on to that
brown
more
men,
with Lucy Powell. Sorry to interrupt, but I just don't want to get too into that because we've got Lucy Powell coming up. But
yeah,
didn't mean
exactly.
to cut you around.
But yeah, good point. You could sense me going.
Just
that
me
way.
being the host.
Yeah, you should do as well because I will go. That stuff really winds me up. But anyway, you can see where I'm going with that. You can see the way it's shaped. They're believing their own hype. So reform is the vote, and we saw that play out with some significant success. And Nigel Farage and his team are rightly celebrating that. There's a long way to go. And of course, now they've got to govern locally. They've got to govern councils. And, notoriously, that's incredibly difficult to get right. In fact, we know, because we've watched Labour, Lib Dems and Greens do it for decades, that very rarely does anyone get it right. The halcyon days of the new Labour movement in the late 90s, before the world went to shit, is unlikely to return. So nobody's going to get massive, great success. However, if he does strip out things like DEI and he doesn't waste money on multiculturalism and essentially performs his own doge on the councils that reform are in control of, that's going to play well across the spectrum. It's not just right-wing people that think that wasting money is a bad idea. You can't make poor. I know in some degree you can split the management of the economy down the middle of a political divide, but most people have money and don't have enough of it and know what it's like not to, and know what it's like to try and spend it on the things that's best for them or the best for their community. So I don't think that's a right and left issue necessarily. So he's got an excellent opportunity now, and of course we've said this 1,000 times on here, and I know I have, that it's the only way that reform can prove that they can govern between now and 2029, because they're not going to prove that they can govern with 5 or 6 MPs in Parliament. So they need to run local councils, and I wish them all the very best, because obviously if the local councils are run well and they're able to show that they can govern in some way, then reform stand a really good chance. And of course, the biggest story here is the breaking, potentially, of the two-party system. And that's what we desperately need.
Yeah. So there's loads that we could go into, but I'm trying to think of things people won't necessarily have heard, but we'll go into Kemi in a minute because that's really interesting. All the stuff, whether Kemi's going to survive, and all the things she said after this drubbing in the elections. But there were a few things I wanted to pick up on. One is, well, the councillors is interesting. I mean, Darren Grimes won, our former colleague. Yeah, and it's interesting. With councillors, it's almost just about personal competence, isn't it? You can have local MPs. Someone like Andrew Bridgen was seen as sort of like a liability by the Westminster bubble, but was very popular in his constituency. Just that's as an MP, but that's just an example. On a local level, you can be very popular. So that'll come down to competence. And the argument is, they haven't governed. They have no idea what the real challenges are. Once they get in and find there's no money, that's true. The DEI thing was a debate with Dame Andrea Jenkins, wasn't it? She said, well, we're going to scrap DEI. They came back and said, there isn't even DEI in the areas you're talking about. We don't have DEI. And she came back and said, no, you do. They're just called outreach. They're called a number of euphemisms. And of course there is. So hard to know on that. I suspect there is, and they're just called different names. I tend to agree with Andrea there, but it's hard to know for sure. But yes, that kind of thing goes on. But in general, it may not be the main challenge at local council. The main challenge is going to be there's no money. But also, probably one imagines there's ring fence money for kind of lefty causes that the lefty brain doesn't even think it's possible to slash. So there are probably savings to be made that are kind of more ideological than people let on. My guess is, but maybe there is just no money. Well, I guess we'll find out. But yes, Farage is aware that reform has to now be competent. That's the interesting thing to see. And it really was about immigration. Even Dan Hodges found this. He was out, even Dan Hodges, because he often has some silly opinions, but he went out and found out everyone was just talking about immigration. That's what, again, the lefty mind can't grasp. They can't grasp that it was all about immigration. I said these elections were voters saying how much they hate immigration, because if they say it in words, they go to prison. Fairly decent tweet. You may say hyperbole, but people can't really. They can't. Even in the article with Dan Hodges, even at this stage, someone was saying, I'm not racist, but, and it's like the fact they still feel the need to say that, country just destroyed by the Boris wave and insane migrant policies, but people are so worried because they've been hit with these charges of racism, which we'll get into later with Racy Powell. Racy Powell? That's a completely different. That's a completely different person.
Yeah, I've seen her videos, mate. Don't you worry about it. Racy Powell, yes, please.
Yeah, that's an OnlyFans I was looking at before I came on. So we'll look at that later with Lucy Powell. I'm trying to speak too quickly, but yeah, there was a woman here, Joanne, a carer, who said, "Reform. I'm not racist, but sorry, the country needs sorting out." These are just good people of Britain who, they don't want to be seen as mean, but these results speak volumes because the two main parties are completely failed on all levels. Now, Starmer, his response has been to say, "We're aware that, I get it. I totally get it." Totally doesn't get it, by the way. We need to go far. We're doing the changes, but we need to go faster, quicker, faster, harder communism, more of it, faster. I'm paraphrasing. It's like, no, Starmer, that's not what we need to do at all. People, as even Labour people said, people don't like what we're giving them. They don't want more of it. It's like, you did enjoy this. You did enjoy this slop I'm serving. Here's more slop faster. No, Starmer, we don't want your slop. Stop it.
No, you can't help but worry that there's not much different between his foreplay with Mrs. Starmer and the other fella, and what he talks about.
The other fella. So she's a man, and there's another man.
And the way he talks about policy, it's all harder, faster, quicker, slop.
Yeah, she's no, Key, that's not what I want.
No, yeah, exactly. Look, there's a couple.
That's grim.
It is good. Unfortunately, and who can blame that lady for talking about reform, starting her sentence with "I'm not racist," but because racism has been reframed entirely. Racism now means anybody who questions anything to do with immigration, because the people are just coincidentally happen to be more often than not of a different skin color. Got absolutely nothing to do with their race, actually. On 9 times out of 10, most people aren't even thinking it's because of their race. They're thinking we have an incumbent culture and an imported culture. So that immigration is either legal, slightly unlegal, or very illegal. And most people are saying we are totally fed up with the number of illegal immigration and the imported cultures coming in. We don't have the resources and infrastructure ourselves. So they have to. What I'd love to see is it being dismantled, this reframing of racism. And we're seeing it in other cultural ways, which we'll go into another time. And of course, when we talk about it from the other side, people on the left are totally indoctrinated. They don't know any different. It's like they've been brought up a certain way to think a certain way, and they don't realise they're just drones of the politics that they follow. People who are often accused of being on the right, you and I, for instance, are generally seem to be people who are critically attacking that indoctrination and the thought patterns on both sides. You famously do it all the time with Farage and Reform, and get into hot water with our own following.
Yes,
because you don't just go, "Oh, Farage said it," or "Trump said it, so therefore I must believe it." And it's the same the other way around. If people on the left did that more often, we wouldn't be in this. But they've just blindly gone with it ever since New Labour and the importation of quote unquote cheap labour to quote unquote bolster our economy. And at no point did they ever consider how that would impact the incumbent culture. And the point that they discovered that it did impact it negatively, they decided that they weren't going to expose themselves as the perpetrator of that crime. So what they would do is reframe everything around racism and multiculturalism, and anyone who thought differently was racist or bigoted. And of course, we know those things are terrible. So we find ourselves exactly where we are now, where we've got this massive division. And the good people, the people who profess to be the good people on the progressive left, are also in cahoots with the child rapists. They have no idea. They're like, yes, the child rapists, they're good people. And you're like, take a minute, you dickhead. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, in the Labour outlook, there is really no difference between someone coming over 10 minutes ago versus someone who's been here for generations. They can't really. There's no real way of acknowledging that difference. We're all just materialist Homo economicus, rational actors looking for a better economic zone, all
Homo
completely.
economicus. It
Yeah,
sounds like the missing link between Neanderthal and us.
yeah, it's just a term meaning a sort of rational, self-interested actor who, tries to maximize his outcomes and rather than someone. What we're learning though is that people have other concerns. This is the core debate now. There's those who just see that things in economic terms. Oh, I'll go to Dubai because it's a better deal. And the flip side, people coming here and there's no difference. And Rishi Sunak's as English as anyone else, and so is Sadiq Khan. All this kind of debate, but actually, there's a deep debate about who is English, who is British, what does it mean, as we know. But yes, the idea, the new Labour idea, people are purely these economic rational actors who are nothing else, just not stacking up anymore. And it's not stacking up because of the levels of immigration and the challenges that brings. But that's too big a topic. But it's all part of it in this election. I mean, and that's why Labour can't ever tackle the immigration problem. Probably ideologically impossible for them, and to be convincing on it. The other thing is Blair had these good slogans: education, 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 tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Harder to prove whether he's done it or not. Starmer has smashed the gangs, and it's just clear he hasn't smashed the gangs because we keep seeing dinghies. So that's a complete failure. Yeah, but the scale of it was interesting, and the question is, will people stick with it? One question is, will people stick with it at the general election? There was an interesting graphic from the Telegraph talking about the Runcorn by-election, which was, of course, won by 6 votes in the end by Reform,
Up from 4.
and such a devastating, but it was such a Labour safe seat considered, and such a swing that the if there was a Runcorn swing in the general election, which is like a fun thing to imagine, you go from 411 Labour seats to 138. Reform go from 5 to 420, and in this, the Conservatives get 6, Lib Dems get 17, and you just end up. So it's showing how massive that swing is. Now, critiques of that, although they accept Runcorn, that's a terrible result for Labour, and everyone accepts that. On the wider election, some people say, well, this was a Tory kind of areas election. It wasn't Labour strongholds. It wasn't urban areas. It was more Tory areas. That's one of the claims that makes it slightly less bad for Labour. But it's a little bit clutching at straws. But I understand the point. These were areas that weren't Labour strongholds. But the Runcorn by-election was a Labour stronghold, and they got smashed there, or beaten there. So you go, I think a lot of people just think this is the big change. It's not something that is going to be reversed in the general. What about Kemi though, Paul? Because that's quite interesting. I'll just give you some fun quotes since we are a light-hearted take on the news. So one thing is, she said it takes 2 years minimum for people to forget your time in government. We have to stay the course. So just the wait for people to forget policy. Yeah, she's also said as recently as January that we know policies for 2 years. I mean, this approach is hilarious in the light of Farage. This approach may have worked in the sort of Tories' wilderness years of Michael Howard and Ian Duncan Smith and so on. These kind of
Michael Howard.
Yeah. Well, that's when they were really like, okay, what do we do to bring back the Tories? And in the end, they found Cameron, and then he comes back. But there was a wilderness years for the Tories until they found Cameron. And she thinks it's that kind of thing, it seems to me. She talked about the Conservative Party looking like an oasis of calm. I mean, you just hit an iceberg. What are you talking about, an oasis of calm? It's like this is an emergency situation. She thinks it's just a time to reflect and relax. Actually, now people are starting talking about this is a break glass situation, and she's coming up with this policy that they're going to have to leave the ECHR, which everyone's known for ages, but she's refused to do before. I'll give you one little quote here. So, when the results began coming in, Nigel Huddleston, the party chairman, said, turning the party's fortunes around was a marathon, not a sprint. In conversations with aides, Badenoch says it takes 2 years minimum for people to forget your time in government. We have to stay the course. That was that quote. But as one former Downing Street aide put it, at the start of a marathon, you usually start running forward. So, it's a marathon, but they've gone backwards and they're getting absolutely spanked. There was another poll. It was in that Times piece I referred to earlier with the little graph. People were voting on how they would vote in a general election, and in that, Reform came out on top, Labour came out second, the Lib Dems came third, and Tories came fourth. So the Tories could even have just rendered themselves the fourth party. Imagine that.
Thanks to Reform, and thanks to themselves. Let's not take that away from them.
Yeah,
it's really multifaceted, this, actually, because Kemi Badenoch will not be leader of the opposition when we go to the next general election. I'd bet my house on it. This at the moment is if you're against Kemi's, good opportunism, because why wouldn't you? You can look at this success for reform as a big defeat for Labour, but you can also look at it as an even bigger defeat for conservatism. Although I would argue that the former is a bigger defeat, because I think a lot of those votes have come from traditional working class Labour voters who are now so disenfranchised with whatever Labour has become, ultra progressive, cosmopolitan, metropolitan wank, that means nothing to the working man and woman of Middle England at all. Just made England sound like a mythical place, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean by that. There's always a town, isn't there? The such and such man, the such and such woman in the general election. These are the people that you're aiming at, and elections in the last 5 to 10 years have been won and lost on those areas, and that's exactly what happened at a microcosm at the local election level. Kemi, unfortunately, to use a football analogy, is probably the David Moyes of the Conservative Party. So she, not that Conservatives had Alex Ferguson in place for 14 years, but if you take 14 years in power as a great success, and the Conservative and Unionist Party, as they're known, are the most successful political party in British history. That is a pretty big success story to be in power for that long, when you consider all things that were happening during that time. She's now picked up the mantle after a huge defeat, with Labour coming in on the smallest mandate / majority / turnout that we've seen in a very, very long time. There's so much apathy out there now. This huge void has appeared, and the only person who seems to be filling it at the moment is Nigel Farage. And just by being essentially contrarian to the Uni Party. So I think Kemi is struggling to find her place in that. What does she stand for? I was, if I'd had a vote, I'd probably, you and I have had a discussion a couple of times and much still discuss. I would have probably voted for Kemi Badenoch against Robert Jenrick. Now, of course, what's happened since then is his prominence within the Conservative Party has not gone away, and he's essentially taken the mantle here. He's making videos every day. He's talking about the same sort of subjects that Nigel Farage is. He's talking somewhat sympathetically of reform. He's not pitting himself against them in the same way that Kemi Badenoch is. Now, if he was the leader, he'd probably have to, but he's not the leader, so he can afford to be more flexible. And he looks, Robert Jenrick, that is, to be a very good candidate. I wouldn't mark Philp out of that race, and that's the sort of thing the Conservatives would do, by the way. So I'll come back to you in a second, because this is right in your ballpark, 100% with you.
I was the first person to say that.
So I don't want to steal that thunder at all. But historically, with the Conservatives, it's not the Robert Jenrick front runner character that goes ahead and wins the next race. It is the Philp character, or someone yet unknown, but someone of that ilk, someone who's there that we're unaware of at the moment. But Nick, this is very much you, mate, and you've made a lot of good predictions on this, so I'm going to hand it back.
Well, I mean, I don't know if Philp really will take over from Jenrick, but he certainly wants to be the leader at some point. You can tell he's extremely competitive, which I know from I've listened to stuff about his five-a-side team, and he's just always commenting and popping up. But I think it's still Jenrick. Has to be Jenrick at this point. Everyone knows that. There's already talks to get rid of Kemi. It's just a question of when, really, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah, she won't be there.
It's just a question of when. And I think I described it the other day as a bit like pass the parcel with the talk. You've got to get the leadership at the right time just before the election. Whether Jenrick could stay 4 years, I think he probably could. I think he's just changed now. They've got to do something now to show that they're aware. But whether that will just be a new policy, like, we'll leave the ECHR, I don't know if that would be enough at this point. I think they have to get Jenrick in and leave the ECHR, but also change the Human Rights or repeal the Human Rights Act, which keeps us in the ECHR. What else? They've just got to come in and say the kind of things he's been saying. As you point out, he's been to the right of Farage on many things, and so he just needs to carry on doing that, because that's going to be the only space. Reform's not really a right-wing party. I mean, I know people get weird about this, but it's basically not. It's talking about nationalisation. It's like progressive taxes for people up to £20,000. That's a kind of, I guess that's as neutral. I mean, old Lib Dems used to say things like that. I don't know where you place that on the spectrum. They've got various policies that everyone's basically admit, other than sort of the nutter lefties who say they're far right. Anyone objective admits they're a kind of new thing. They're kind of rejecting the old paradigm of left and right, and it's a different mix of issues, which is the right thing. I mean, people like Cummings have talked about this for ages. People aren't really on the left and right in this country. The
No.
example I always like to use is they want the death penalty, but they want the NHS. So where does that even fit? But actually, to be honest, it's socially conservative with some left-wing things on the economy, like nationalising rail and so on. If anyone ever cracks that, lots of people try and occupy that space. The SDP, Blue Labour, no one really. Labour's abandoned that space. Perhaps that is the space that Reform's filling. The red wall, socially conservative, but prepared to be left on nationalisation and protecting our own economy and things like that. A sort of economic nationalism aspect. That But then again, are they the Thatcher tribute band that Hitchens says? Are they Thatcherite on economics? I don't totally know because I don't know all their policies, and I don't think anyone does. We know they hate net zero and they talk about stopping immigration, but whether they will, we don't know. But they've certainly smashed it in this election. I mean, they've absolutely crushed it, and it does show that it's not just a protest vote. It is that Reform have done well. It's also disdain for the other parties. I was a little bit worried when Farage came out and started bragging about the diversity, and people have already attacked me for this, but he's like, oh, we've now got women, we've got Zia Yusuf, and it's like, are you really going to play that game of boasting about diversity that all the other parties have played? They got the Tories in so much trouble with Cameron's A-list, and now probably has led to weaker candidates. I just hate all that stuff. I think you're accepting the ground that woke has claimed, and you're ceding the ground to woke. If you talk about anything other than merit, he kind of pivoted to talking about merit, but really it sounded like he was bragging about diversity. But they've done very well. They got Sarah Poach in Runcorn, and they've absolutely smashed it. And I don't know if there's much more to say about it other than, well, there's endless amounts if you want to, but we've probably done enough.
Yeah. No, I think
people
we
will
probably
always
have.
attack me because I'll attack Reform where necessary or criticise them where necessary. The Rupert Lowe thing, absolute disaster. I'm not convinced they're going to get things done that I want. At the same time, it's always fun that they've spanked the Tories and Labour, and they may be the only option for now. I accept that for now. I mean, I just don't believe that they're totally a party on the right. If Jenrick takes up the space on the right, if he doesn't, then there's room for a Rupert Lowe type thing to take it up.
Yeah,
maybe.
just to wrap it up, it's not necessarily the result because it's local elections and it's councils, etc., etc. It's what's happened in the psyche of the electorate and those constituents within the electorate that I think is really important. A couple of big things have become very apparent now. Okay, there is much bigger support for reform than people would like to have believed this time last week, and people are now less afraid to say, I support reform. And that latter is incredibly important because the one thing that Labour and the Conservatives had in their favour up until very recently was that if someone openly said in the street on a vox pop, I support Farage's policies or I would vote reform, it was very easily challenged by saying, really? What, all the anti-immigration stuff, etc., etc. And then people would pipe down, and anyone who was actually thinking about voting reform or talking about reform might think, yes, that makes me bad, I won't do it. Now, the psyche's changed. It's in people's minds. Reform are the third party in the UK, legitimately so. And if that momentum carries on, Nick, then we're going to see a big change to the two-party system.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go and do this Lucy Powell story then, which people, again, will be aware of. It's a little bit old as we record, but there are lots of updates to it. So Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, I'm sure you'll know, was on Any Questions, Radio 4. And Tim Montgomery asked if she'd seen the recent Channel 4 documentary on grooming gangs, which Starmer probably thinks is a drama series. And she said, oh, we want to blow that little trumpet now, do we? Let's get that dog whistle out, shall we? Shocking moment. Completely insane. I want to make actually a slight niche point that Tim Montgomery's point already was wrong as well, because he said, oh, I'm sure these people had good intentions, the people who covered up things and didn't want these things to be exposed. Good intentions, the same thing that Tom Holland said. It's not good intentions. That we've got to stop even saying that. The idea that you had good intentions about community relations, so you were cautious about talking too freely about or looking into the rape gangs. He said, no doubt with good intentions. No, it's not good intentions. Anyway, that's a side point. But She made the shocking comment. She then followed it up saying that she regretted it. Um, I was challenging the political point scoring around it, not the issue itself. As a constituency MP, I've dealt with horrendous cases. And she said in the heat of the debate, it came across badly. So, oh no, West Streeting said that. So she did this apology that most people weren't really buying it, as far as I can see. I've said on GB News that it was a slip and it was the old software she was accidentally running. When I say
Yeah,
a
I like
slip,
that.
I don't mean in any way to let her off the hook. What I mean is politicians for years have been saying you're racist if you raise this, dog whistle, racist, same type of thing. She said that in the past that's always worked. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, we're racist, and it shut people down. Now there's been a massive sea change. So many people in the country are aware. People have read the transcripts. People know this is the industrialized rape and torture of children. Probably the worst atrocity in our history. Worst atrocity, one of the worst atrocities in history in any country. It's unfathomably bad when you look into it, as many people now have. So for her to say that became monstrous, vulgar, grotesque, sick. Any word you can use, and she thought she could just run out that old program, but she got absolutely hammered for it. Somehow she's still there, which she shouldn't be.
Yeah,
But
Keir Starmer today has come out and give her his full backing, which probably means that that's the end of her.
could be the end of her. The old
Yeah,
Premier League manager. You still
yeah,
believe in him. And just to give you a few updates, because everyone will know that initial story. This Michael White, who you apparently wrote for the Guardian, maybe still does. He replied to someone who Paul Banbury said yes because he wouldn't have needed the victims of. Oh yeah, he said victims of Asian grooming weren't believed. Their cries for help ignored. The crimes being committed against them uninvestigated because of the color of the perpetrator's skin. And then this guy Michael White replied that it was horrible, Paul, but it was a bit more complicated than that, wasn't it? Sex often is. It's a bizarre thing to be saying. I said quite difficult to say something worse about the rape gangs than Lucy Powell did, but Michael's giving it a good go. It was a really bizarre comment, and it even got a community note that was very, very damning. Not that people
yeah.
necessarily needed a community note on that, but the community note said it is not the case that children can consent to sex with adults. This legal concept is not complicated. So, what a bizarre, sick thing to say. Um, most people have got, though, that this is absolutely monstrous. The whole thing. Yes, things come out in the moment, but how could that come out, the Lucy Powell thing, unless that's in your mind in the first place? You or I couldn't say that because it wouldn't be anywhere in our wheelhouse to say, "Oh, that dog whistle." It could never. We would never think of something like that.
Psychologically, it's incredibly fascinating, genuinely fascinating. We've somehow, through this debate, managed to normalise child rape through the prism of multiculturalism, and that in itself is damning. I think we've got ourselves to a point where I've listened back to it a few times. Lucy Powell didn't say any of that with any real malice. It wasn't. It didn't even seem snarling. It just seemed entirely natural, which I think makes it slightly more concerning. Um, had someone shown some malice against people that were against child rape, of course that's very dangerous. But what I mean is exactly your point. She felt incredibly comfortable to say that. Now, there's enough plausible deniability in there that she could have been being playful with it. However, going to play that trumpet, are you? Going to blow that dog whistle? Bants. Okay. However, there are certain things that we all know, no matter what we believe, that are sacred, and we don't play with, because they are so serious that it doesn't fall either side of the political divide. It's just incredibly serious. And child rape gangs, Pakistani child rape gangs, very much sit in the core of that bucket. No two ways about it. So Lucy Powell, from a political naivety perspective, was thick, genuinely thick about this. She could have said almost anything else, and she wasn't in the midst of some fiery debate. A question was coming her way. If you ever listen to that show, and I used to listen to that show all the time. I don't anymore, but I used to listen to that show all the time. It's a really good debate show. It really is. I don't know if it is anymore, but I always enjoyed any questions, and because it shared the spectrum of views, and it was in front of an audience. And this is the point I'm waffling to. When she said that, nobody on the panel or the audience, well, no one on the panel challenged her too much, but nobody in the audience went with her. Everybody in that audience, a BBC audience, felt like that was beyond the pale, that they weren't themselves going to show any positive emotion towards her comment. And I think it's a massive misstep. She's totally misjudged, the vibe within the UK at the moment, and she's done so because it's inherent within that cabinet to believe that. You can't. There is an argument. I'm not saying there isn't an argument that there is an element of dog whistle about certain types of politics, and that's true of both sides. But what you have to agree on sometimes is that child rape is bad, and that when you've allowed the systematic child rape of poor white girls in northern communities, in fact, lots of different UK communities, when you've allowed that because you can only see the world through the prism of multiculturalism, because you are so indoctrinated in your political belief that you will not protect children from rape, then you probably shouldn't be anywhere near governing, would be my point. And Lucy Powell fits very much into that bracket. Whether she meant to or didn't mean to, she should be nowhere near our governing cabinet with that type of view in mind. There's no justifying it. It's a huge misstep. You have to step away and go, do you know what? I shouldn't be near this. We have to see this as a serious, dangerous issue, Nick.
Yeah, and I don't know how you don't resign after that. I mean, look at her so-called
Because you like the position, because you like the power.
Look at her so-called apology tweet, though. 1.3 thousand likes. Don't know who those people are. 16,000 replies. This is known as a very brutal ratio on Twitter, and the other aspect of ratioing is the likes and the replies. Rupert Lowe, when you told people what you really thought, they listened. 21,000 likes versus her 1.3. Lots of comments. Burnside, Graham Linehan, Leo, Kirst, Nick Buckley. Everyone just weighing in as you'd expect. But it was absolutely disgusting. And Twitter's not real life, they say, but in this case, I think it is. I think that is where the public sentiment will be on that.
It's interesting to see the amount of people that were forefront in the trans debate now becoming entrenched in this as well. And it's because it's all part of the same Venn diagram. There's a great deal of misogyny within this multiculturalism. There's a great deal of turning a blind eye to the disenfranchising of women and girls within the UK. They seem to be the victim of so much progressive policy that you can't help but feel that the people that come up with it are either completely dismissive of women and girls, or they just don't like them. Because it seems, unless they are of a certain colour.
Yeah, we'll get into that Daisy Blakemore Creedon story later, where she's been forced to quit as a Labour councillor for saying taxis should have security. But exactly, this is interesting, isn't it? Will women pick this up? I said if J.K. Rowling got stared at by a migrant on the tube, it would be all over for immigration, because Rowling. So when they pick up these people like Kelly J. Keane are picking it up and being quite effective. Once women, and they are starting to realise the link between immigration and their own.
They're starting to join the dots.
Yeah.
That dot the dot is now drawing this picture, which is, oh shit, it's all the same, isn't it? It's all the same people. They're trying to control the narrative via the same methods every time, and out of it you get rape gangs, you get you get men in female only spaces, and you get being told that if you think English is primarily being indigenous to this country and having a white skin color, you're also incredibly bad. And they're all, you're all being told this by exactly the same people. And of course, their supporters know no different, because there's indoctrination that we constantly talk about. It's just that people have been told, and they have been told to think a certain way and not be critical of it in any way. And we end up with this massive divide.
Yeah. I mean, compared to the trans debate, which I understand was important, but when you look at immigration from non-compatible or far less compatible in many examples cultures, and then illegal immigration, and what that's doing to women's safety, I'd say it's not close. It's not close in terms of impact. Obviously, someone in a women's prison or in a rapist and so on, that's obviously terrible. But in terms of impact, I don't think it's close to what immigration will do and is doing and has done for women's safety in the negative. So let's see that play out. That's going to get very interesting. Kelly J. Keen's already doing it. She's quite bold and not worried about being called right wing in the way that some of them are. Even someone like Rowling, even though she's done great work on some things, very much a sort of total lib on all. So will she ever be able to cross that divide? And it'd be very interesting to see, because that is a massive issue for women's safety. But and she's obviously ultra rich, but people are saying in general, oh, middle class women are starting to realize. We've seen what it's done to working class girls. That's clear. But now if middle class women are, oh, hang on, I keep getting in uncomfortable situations now just on the street. That's going to change.
The working class women don't have the voice that the middle class women do.
No.
And I mean that literally as well. You hear a working class voice on national television, and it's all, even in today's slightly more enlightened class-free society, which I don't believe is true, people will very quickly dismiss a working class voice over a middle class voice because they will assume education. They will assume ignorance. And that's exactly what's happened when fathers and daughters and mothers and aunties and sisters have gone into police stations and said, my daughter, my friend, my such and such is being raped by these Pakistani gangs. And they've gone, shh, no, shut up. That's exactly what's happened. Because they know they can do that because of the way where those people live and the way they're perceived by the greater masses. Yeah. If that is J.K. Rowling or someone who looks and sounds like her walking into a police station saying that, and also saying, I am going to get behind this and you're in a lot of trouble, there's panic. Yeah. There's panic. And even with people like J.K. Rowling and Kelly J. Keen, they've had to fight incredibly hard to get to this point, obviously from two different angles. Kelly had a lot less to lose, although arguably has lost a lot, but gained a lot. Thank you very much for that. J.K. Rowling couldn't lose. She's lost maybe some of her reputation with the wankers that wanted to fight her on it, but she doesn't care for that. She doesn't need to care for that. So we owe a gratitude to her. But I think there's definitely a class issue here.
Absolutely, it's the Douglas Murray, Tommy Robinson divide. We're still an incredibly class-driven society, possibly always will be. Yeah, it's been not trendy to talk about. It's been trendy to talk about race and multiculturalism, all this stuff. But class is absolutely there at all times. You and me know that. Never goes away. You can go into a company or somewhere, and a sort of a 20-year-old just out of school can have utter disdain and think they're better than you because they're a bit posh. Am I wrong?
No, they've been taught that's how they should believe as well. I mean, I talk as someone who says that I'm working class, but amongst my working class cohort, I'm not considered working class. This accent that you hear now might sound working class to you, but to many people it doesn't. And to the working class friends and family of mine, it doesn't.
There's different levels, isn't there? But if you've been to state school and you're not posh, which covers both of us, you might be slightly more working class, I might be slightly more in lower middle, but we're definitely not in whatever that is. We're not getting a BBC job. We're not somehow connected to anything. We don't have any contacts or any network. We have to build it all ourselves from nothing. Someone called me part of the media class the other day, and I laughed because now maybe that's just purely an objective. He claimed it wasn't an insult later, it was just an objective description. Maybe, but to me, it conjures up like someone's dad's called Crispy and they've walked into a job at the BBC at 20 years old. It's not someone who's signed on in Biker, who's done 11 years in comedy clubs. One bloke believed in him, so he got into a channel that was considered toxic that no one else would do. Is that the media class? Maybe. No. The idea that my views come in any way from the media class is so absurd to me. It's ridiculous.
We're looked down upon by the media classes, Nick.
Yeah. I don't think we're really in them. I just happen to be on the telly on a certain channel.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, but no, we're not. And anyway, Nick, that wasn't aimed at me, but we're not. And, that's fine with us. No problem whatsoever. But, the accusation comes with a certain level of disdain, which is unfairly appointed to us. And because of that, we're going to refute it because you're not going to bung us in a bracket and say you can't listen to them because they're just all part of the same blob. Absolutely not. Both of us, to varying levels of success, took a gamble to come to GB News. And it shut immediately by doing it. It shut doors, particularly at the time 3 years ago. In fact, things have changed slightly now. I'm not sure it's opened any doors yet, but there is a possibility another 3 or 6 years' time it might open doors. They might want different views. But if that was to happen, that's purely because we took a risk.
No, you're right. You did it knowing that you'd never get on the BBC.
Yeah,
That was it. You'd be hated by, for example, the entire comedy world. I mean, I'm retired from comedy, but if you at the time I still in it? I can't remember, but I was sort of semi in it. But you know exactly all sorts of doors shut. It was seen as very toxic. Just being on headline, you managed to miss this bit. We got abused.
I
Headliners had
did.
already been running for a long time. Then it finally released an actual sort of official press release that it was existed, and the comedy world just attacked it. People like took the poster and did things to my face and everyone else's face, like to make us look horrific. If people from the comedy world, this is thought to be the kind of thing. This is the thing the nice people do, and that's insane. But whatever. But it's like you dodge some of the early stuff. You're in it now. It's still some people think that way. I'm sure you meet them in comedy, running your comedy clubs. But yes, at the start it was even worse, so to speak. And I always talk about our former producer at GB who was getting a haircut. Told them he was at GB and they didn't finish the haircut. Now, many people listen to this will think GB is incredibly mild, but even GB, and obviously I do Lotus Eaters and things like that, and this, whatever we're doing now, whatever I do, which, more out there, and GB is pretty mild, which it is, but it's like, but even that, you have to give up also. Yeah, anyway, a bit of a digression, but we're not part of the media class, we're part of
No,
the hated underclass, Paul.
exactly. And it's a digression that needs just to be articulated, I think. Not in defence of us, but in defence of the profit of ideas. The idea that we can think freely, the idea that we can critically think, I think is incredibly important and for our own authenticity. So, I mean, say what you like, and we encourage that. But to say it's unauthentic in some way is a lie.
All right, agreed. So we've done the locals, we've done the Lucy Powell story, which was shocking. Let's see what happens with that. Will she stick around? Let's see what happens with reform. All very exciting and interesting. I'm critical of reform. It's a bit sad for me that I can't be 100% on board because of how they treated Rupert. I've been very vocal about it. Now I'll probably be hated by the reform people. So I can't be like, wait, that's my team. I'm more
We'll
like,
be coming back to that though, Nick.
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
That story has not gone away. It's just quietened down because of last week.
Yeah. So I'm very on it. I'm just like, yeah, good for reform. Well done. Good to spank the Uniparty. Hope they're not part of the Uniparty. But I'm going to keep saying it. People keep telling me, still to this day, people said, stop. Even yesterday, someone who's actually a fan said, stop causing division. Nick. When you say anything critical of reform, people go absolutely mad. They're like, stop it. It's like, just stop it. What is wrong? You think I'm going to stop giving my opinion, which is all I do, because you now it's bothering you? It's insanity.
Yeah, look, and I would say to those people, we understand where you're coming from, but the thing to understand in return is in order to speak the way that we do and get onto the platforms that we have, we were already thinking this way long before it was actually okay to do so. Or that it was in any way ubiquitous to do so. There's a lot more centre-right, right-wing voices available on even the non-legacy media now, where there weren't at the time. You joined GB News as a comedian. It was mental. It was mental. It was like someone from the Green Party joining, National Socialism. That's the way it was viewed, because you're like, sorry, you're part of the creative arts world, aren't you? You're not allowed to think this way. You have an independent, critical view of politics, and you don't just assume this. You don't just accept this carte blanche. No. So we were already at some point, way before it was trendy to do so, bucking the trend and forming these views. And we're not going to, we're well down that journey now. We're not sowing division. We're just saying, and we don't always agree, particularly when it comes to reform. I've been a lot more softer with regards to reform than you have, but I totally respect the view that you don't just carte blanche support Nigel Farage because that's the only thing you can hook your coattails on. Yeah, okay, it seems the only real way out of it at the moment, but you only got to go back 6 months, and did it look that way? A year ago, definitely didn't look that way. 18 months ago, no chance. So things in politics change quite quickly, and there's this huge void and chasm that still exists at the moment. So we should keep pushing for change, but not just change at any cost.
Yeah, to me, it's just all about who gets it done. And when Farage started talking about watering down, we can't do deportations, and we'll lose to Islam if we that absurd thing on Winston Marshall. the absurd comments to Steve Edington. Then he pulled it back a minute and go, "No, we'll have a minister for deportations. We will get it done." My problem is and other people say, "No, you don't understand. Like, he's saying what he needs to say to get in, and then they can do it." Maybe, but to me, it's like he's already prepared to water it down that much, and it's already going to be very hard to do once you get in. And he doesn't even need to water it down that much because he's put himself to the left of the electorate by doing so, and now he's gone back a bit. But it's to me that's the issue. Is that you've got to go in there absolutely determined to crush immigration, and even then, it's going to be near impossible with the blob and so on. And so that was my concern there. I support anyone who will get it, who will get it done. And I understand people disagree who will get it done. They say reforms are our only hope. My vote actually doesn't matter anyway because of where I live. But I voted reform last time. We'll see. I vote for anyone who will stop immigration, basically stop the boats, massively reduce so-called legal immigration, get rid of a load of people we have here we don't want. I'll decide who.
Yeah. Well, one thing both of us share in terms of ideology is the ideology that we'd like to see some loyalty within politics, and that's quite frankly laughable. And that's even so. Quite often, I would come down on the side of the argument with you long before Rupert Lowe and any of that stuff, saying, "Come on, the reform have got to come towards the centre so that they can push back out to the right after success." The thing that changed my view slightly on that through the Rupert Lowe thing was the smear campaign. Now, a lot of this is going to come out, so I could be proven entirely wrong, but I didn't like the personal attack. And are we in it together or are we not in it together, etc.? Did it need to be managed that way? Did it not need to be managed that way? I would like to have seen a lot more loyalty there, is one thing I would say for sure.
Yeah, and Farage will say, well, they weren't showing loyalty to him. But yeah, even yesterday or 2 days ago as we record, he came out and said that they're nothings, these people, meaning Habib and Rupert Lowe, and they're all nothing. And that these election results have proved that. Certainly, the election results have proved the Rupert Lowe thing didn't matter too much electorally at the moment. But to come out and say they're just nothings, well, the establishment's been saying that about Farage for years. Oh, he's not won an election. He's this, he's that. They've been trying to ridicule him for years, saying he's a kind of irrelevance. And now he's become relevant. Now he's ridiculing Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe. But they could become relevant at some point, or they're already relevant to me, but they could become more in the public consciousness. So I hate that.
I think we're taught to. I'll just wrap this up very quickly. But we're taught to try and lose well as British people, but we're also taught how to win well as well. And I think if you're in the ascendancy, and the people that you've gotten rid of are under fire, you don't need. I've said this 100 times. There have been comments made by Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson and other people that we're generally behind. Where I thought, why get involved in debate? You're in the ascendancy. It is actually below you. You just don't admit it. And that's how you win well. When Manchester United spank a team 5-1, watch the comments afterwards. They don't come out and go, "We smashed the crap. How dog shit are they?" That's not what happens. They assembled. They were a tough team to play, Burnley. I like the way they set out. It was very difficult for us. I know we got 3 goals in the first 2 minutes, but that was tricky. And I like
that you still think United win 5-1, but
I'm just using United because it's you and keeping me on board. But it doesn't happen. I can't use Pompey, can I? I can't remember that time that Pompey won 5-1. It's difficult. Notoriously, you were very successful.
We used to
30 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. That was the thing. People forget when Ben Habib came out. Actually, a lot of people remember this sort of thing, but he came out and was actually saying things like, "Look, I'm sure if I was in the room with Nigel, we'd have a hug. It would all be fine." But just politically, he was keeping it very much on the politics. He wasn't making it personal. Then Farage said, "Good riddance," called him bitter and twisted and all, and immediately came out very hard against him. And it was just, as you say, the wrong tone, completely unnecessary. So that's what I've never understood either. So that and with Rupert, it was really he was tweeting all the things I agree with. Then you're like, that's the guy we're gonna get rid of and behave terribly with. And as you say, ongoing investigation now, so we have to be careful, I guess.
But we don't know. We don't know the facts.
We don't know the facts, but we know the optics, Paul, and we know what we like. But anyway, you let's see. You might be more pro-reform. I'm just pro-truth. You know me, Paul. All right, we've gotten into a slight digression there, but that was local elections, Lucy Powell. Maybe we'll talk about India and this other interesting story with the Labour councillor in the paid bit on nickdixon.net. Thank you very much if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the old audio and all the stuff's at nickdixon.net. We're doing very well. We've got over 5,000 subscribers now. People are loving the paid content. The full interview with Ben Habib is very good. It's got an extra something like 40 minutes. Loads of stuff on nickdixon.net. Paul is on @PaulCoxComedy. and we'll see you very soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.